Hi, everyone. This is Ali John Chaudhary, psychotherapist, and I'm here today with Fern Schumer Chapman. And today's episode is going to be a special episode in that we're going to be talking about sibling estrangement and the body. And many layers are associated to sibling estrangement. And one such aspect that has not been frequently mentioned is how the body responds to our collective experience with estrangement. So, in this episode, we'll aim to understand just how our body can hold traumatic experiences, how these can manifest, and how to free ourselves from these maladaptive patterns and life traps that we may continue to carry into our adult life. So, Fern, it's great to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, great to be here. I love that line that the body keeps the score. It
Yep.
absolutely does. But it's interesting because if our mind or our brain is disconnected from our physical body, we also often don't recognize it. And I have asked clients, where do you feel stress in your body? And they cannot identify it. And that's because their head is cut off from their body. And part of what we do is try to become more and more mindful and aware of where you feel it. So, is it in your stomach? Is it in your breathing? Is it in your head? Everybody's different, but it's there. And one of the challenges is to use it as a cue.
Mhm.
Oh, my head hurts. I must be feeling triggered. I must be feeling stressed.
Yeah. Really, really important to recognize, right? The relationship with the body, right? What is happening to us? What are we feeling? And especially, where does this come from, right? That's a really, really important question for us to be asking ourselves this, right? Especially in terms of where we think this comes from, because a lot of times it does come from the effects of parenting. And I often mention that while growing up in a family unit, we as children can be like blank pages, and our parents are the ones holding the pen, and what they experience is what we can end up invariably carrying within us if we're exposed to it for a sufficient amount of time. And I think that a parent can really have a sense of over reliance on us, especially while we grow up, in terms of their emotional needs by living through us and wanting for us to be their friends, for example, instead of parenting us. And I think in such cases, it can be that we become parentified, which can translate into the one that fixes problems in the family, for instance, or that enables certain situations to arise, right?
Right. Yeah, between 0 and 7, you are creating the blueprint. And I often think of it like uploading software to a computer. And then, of course, that's how the computer runs for the rest of your life, unless you do something to update. And a lot of people I'm working with are trying to stop those old patterns, and it's very difficult to do. But the first step is to become aware of it. And I agree with you that I see a lot of people who have learned to take care of parents' needs at a young age,
Yep.
and then as adults, they're absolutely exhausted because they are taking care of everybody's needs. And
Yep.
that's what they were rewarded for as children.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And a lot of times we ask ourselves, why is this? Why do parents do this? And I think that parents sometimes have a low self-esteem, right? They can invariably transmit the same level of low self-esteem to their child through vague comments that sow seeds of doubt and really strengthen the inner critic. That's another part of it too, especially I think that's important to remember. And what happens to the child is that the child learns to silence their own needs, right? Or adopts the I'm not important schema, which downplays their needs and leads them to self-erasing and self-abandoning themselves, right? And if you've been trained to please your parents from a young age at your own expense, then it could really create fears of abandonment with what is felt as conditional love, which can later translate as enmeshment, codependency, for instance,
Or fawning. You
right?
see a lot of people pleasing and fawning, which is a form of self-erasure, in
Yep.
order to maintain relationships where you're serving them.
Right? Exactly. And when we start to have these types of experiences, sooner or later, there can be a feeling of resentment or guilt that can progressively start to build, which can manifest in certain ways as trauma, for instance,
Mhm.
right? Because there's unmet needs that start to happen that generalize into other patterns, right? So I think this is important to ask ourselves what can start to happen for us as adults when we go through this, right? Because some of these traits are associated with creating self doubt and they can really start to manifest outwardly, as we said, as enmeshment and codependency, whereas inwardly as a lack of trust towards oneself. And I think really what starts to build with some people is that they can start to be disconnected from their emotions. And a lot of times you probably met some people, right, that live in their own heads, and it's almost as though they have no emotions when there may be a storm actually brewing inside of them in reality.
Right. And these patterns manifest in really specific ways. So if you start from the outside and watch what's happening and monitor your body, you can begin the process of unraveling all this. So fatigue or headaches or sleep disturbances or the
Yep.
loss of an appetite or anxiety and depression, all of these are cues.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And as you said, very important to keep in mind what's happening in your body, right? Another aspect of it is low level depression, right? Some people are left with this type of response going on through some sort of family trauma and such. Did your family ever honor or recognize your emotions, right? Were you ever seen or acknowledged, or did you have the shutting down effect in your own family, which really can lead to this type of experience?
Yeah, the word mirroring is often used. This
Mhm.
idea of being seen and someone actively acknowledging and recognizing. And it can get so bad, Ollie John, that people don't even know if they're hungry or tired because nobody said, "Oh, you're rubbing your eyes, you must be tired."
Yeah. Lack,
And
yeah.
so they are completely disconnected from basic human needs and urges.
That's an interesting one. Lack of parental direction, right? That you're describing. And I see this also with some of my clients where they felt they didn't really get that type of structure or told whether they were doing well or not and such, or as you said, the cues, recognizing the cues that are going on within yourself, right? So really important to recognize that and such. Another aspect is always being in a hurried state, right? It's like this continual activation mode. When you learn to be in survival mode from a young age, for instance, this can be one of the lingering states that stays as an adult, right? Families with alcohol issues, religious fundamentalist families, for instance, can have this because oftentimes people are always on the edge like this.
Or completely driven towards work or exercise or something without any sense of what feels joyful.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, and that's unfortunate in a lot of cases, right? Another one is the chameleon effect, right? When we adapt to our environment around us without really showing who we are and really being overly directed towards others, what that does is that keeps us away from being in touch with our own feelings. And I noticed this with some of my clients where people start to think that other people's feelings are more important than theirs. And that's a red flag right there.
Right. That's a direct link to childhood where other people's feelings were more important than theirs.
Hmm. Yeah. And of course, everything that comes with that can manifest through the body, as we're saying, right? Uh, Another one is dissociating when the attention comes on us, right? Somewhere in one's family, a child may have picked up the perception that having attention means we are under attack. Sometimes the lack of emotional space within a family creates that lack of safety.
Uh, I want to point out too something that I've recognized with the clients I work with, and that is they come to me for estrangement, but really that's just the tip of the iceberg. And oftentimes the estrangement is a reflection of the iceberg, which is a chaotic family. And when there's a chaotic family life, you often have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And
Yep.
so I find myself often in conversations, not so much about estrangement, but about CPTSD.
Yeah, that can be one of them, especially when people have a heightened activation and such, and they stay in that level of heightened activation, and the nervous system is constantly overcompensating and such. So I think that's important. And a lot of times it could be also, even with positive feelings, where people put on an ever smiling face, right? And they use pleasantness as a way to mask trauma. And I often mention to some people that it's okay to talk about painful subjects. You don't have to keep it positive. And I
Mhm.
think that women especially need to hear this type of message because from a young age, they tend to be told to put on that ever smiling face, right?
Smile.
Right?
And that can
Mm-hmm.
lead to a false self, which
Mm-hmm.
is what you've been describing in these last few comments. This idea that you don't know who you are and you put forward an image that you think will be palatable to the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's also important to be mindful of that and such, right? Other cases, it manifests as too little or too much emotion, right? And this is a type of deregulation that starts to happen where you really feel that you're shut down from your emotions, and or that when you feel that the wave hits you, it completely carries you away. So you're really in these two extremes, right? Too little or too much. And I've seen some people like this, especially where they talk very casually about the different things that have happened to them and the traumatic things that have happened, and their reaction and how they're talking about it is completely disproportionate to the actual events that
Well,
have,
John, that fits in with what we were saying about mirroring.
right,
Nobody was there to say, "Oh, that's concerning," or "Oh, that's a five-alarm fire."
right, right. And that's really something when you observe that, because you can see people that on the onset might sound a little bit overbearing or annoying when they're doing that, but yet it's probably signs of something bigger underneath, especially. So really important to be mindful of that, right? Hyper consciousness is another one, right? When you feel as though everybody sees what you're feeling, right? And there's like this idea that we're like transparent, right? And it's a very vulnerable state, and sometimes that can be associated with shame, which can be brought upon by critical parenting or continuous criticism from a sibling, especially, right?
Yeah, and one thing to be aware of is that these experiences can often lead to physiological responses. So
Yeah.
immune function may not be online, as you said, mental health issues, but it's not, you can feel it in the body and you can also contribute to problems in the body as well.
Yeah. Really, really important to be mindful of that, especially unexpected feelings of loss or anger, right? Tidal waves that come when we're triggered due to an ongoing conflict or situation of estrangement with a sibling. This can manifest, I think, when we see healthy families that are happy, or when we see other family members treated with respect or politeness when we're not. So sometimes you can see this with some people that have a disproportionate amount of anger that manifests because of that.
Yeah, I hear from a lot of clients who say it's painful to watch siblings on the sidelines of a football field or at a luncheon or whatever
Yeah.
because they feel they're missing out and they feel that this is something they should have. And it activates all those insecurities and
Mhm.
the ambiguous loss.
Absolutely. I think this is an important one to mention too. I think, like you're saying, and really, really good to be able to pinpoint how that manifests. And another one now is called cycling according to mood, right? And I'll start to work on this when it gets better. Always putting off things at a later time and procrastinating, right? This can also mean putting off difficult conversations at a later time or enabling certain behaviors to continue by putting off our action steps into the future when the time is right. And and the thing with that is that it's hard because there can never really be a time where it's right.
Mm.
So I think that that's the thing that's important to recognize when people tend to fall into this type of avoidance and cycling according to one's mood, especially.
Yeah, it's really difficult though to have the confidence to have those conversations if you didn't get what you needed as a child.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so I think that again, this is sometimes where it pops up, where things can start to become uncomfortable for somebody, especially as an adult and such, and how important it is to feel that we can ultimately work with ultimately reparenting ourselves when it comes to that. And we're going to get into some of this now in terms of what is it that we can do to,
Mhm.
of course, experience ourselves in a more healthy and better way. So one of the things that I like to mention that we've talked about before is just slowing down our breathing, right? Just noticing how our breathing changes when our inner state is activated, right? And oftentimes an extended exhale will foster more ease and relaxation through the body, which I think is really important for us to come back to.
You know, there's an app called Breathe to Relax, the number two, relax. And for those who struggle to balance themselves, this is a great stress reducer because it teaches you how to slow down, breathe in deeply for 5 seconds, and exhale for 6 seconds.
Yeah,
And you do that for 10 breaths. And they actually have you measure how did you feel when you start? What was your level of stress? And
yeah.
how did you feel afterwards? And it makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is super important to be able to look at that and such. So there's different apps that can be very helpful like that out there that people can look at and such. Learning to objectify your situation by seeing with healthy indifference. And I like to work with this. I finished a series of regional conferences in my area here. And one of the things we talked about was not labeling your experience, but rather objectifying enough that you can step out of it to get a better view of your situation. So this is what I mean by cultivating healthy indifference, right? Not labeling it as good or bad, but to avoid that amplification and such, but rather staying in that neutral state where you're observing the feeling as it arises. So,
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah, I have a graphic of what you can and can't control, and it really delineates the very little that you can control,
yeah,
like basically your responses. And I always use that with clients, and it seems to help because so much of that unhealthy response is tied to trying to over control.
right. It's also important to be mindful of that, especially. And that's already one thing that can be good as a type of inner work to do is focusing on what we can control as opposed to what we don't, especially, right? So, really sharpening our observation skills and such, that's really important. And also our tolerance towards discomfort, and which can really help us to feel our emotions. So, one of the things I recommend also for our viewers is to start to recognize the unhealthy family patterns that are feeding your inner state. Did you have conditional love, for instance, that bred self abandonment in your family? For instance, we see this with narcissistic parents where the love is very conditional and such, or that maybe one particular parent was going through their own sense of trauma or their own personal psychological issues and such. So really important to recognize that and how, for instance, another one is over involvement and how that can breed enmeshment. So all of these different factors, including doubt from a parent, can really create codependency and really find where it is that you've got anchored by your parent, if that's the case in your family unit.
One of the wonderful aspects of the time we live in is that you can type in words like enmeshment in Google and learn pretty quickly exactly what was playing out in your family
Yeah,
and become educated in no time. And I think of how that compares to just 15 years ago when none of this was available.
yeah,
So there's a lot of value now, and you can expedite the process by researching online to discover some of the family patterns that you experienced.
absolutely. We're so fortunate to live in the era that we do now where we can explore some of this more and that we have the freedom to do that.
Mhm.
And one thing that I recommend to people is to really give importance to your emotions and feelings, right? Learn to discuss them openly with people you trust. And if you can't make your feelings more important than others, then at least make them as important as others. See, that's something that a lot of people struggle with. They tend to downplay and such. But if you can give that level of importance to your feelings, you're already addressing things and rather than burying them and such. So that's so important for people to do,
Underlying that, of course, is the negative self-talk, which is driving this feeling that I don't matter.
right?
Uh, so you have to tackle that to start with.
Exactly. Recognizing where your inner critic is taking you, right? Feeling that and seeing if it has validity, right? It's one thing to feel our feelings, but we do want to recognize if it has validity or if it stems from something else that's deeper, right? And learning to be okay with our mistakes. And I often say to people, learning to slow down, having a conversation with our inner parts, usually our inner child when it comes to having to hurry, right? What's the hurry? You can just slow down and allowing yourself just to be with that part of yourself to explore and maybe even put the brakes, right? Why do we need to be in a hurry? In fact, I have people, for instance, that we have a highway in our area where people often there's places where it's dangerous because people are so in a hurry to get nowhere. They're hurried for no reason at all. So oftentimes it's the case. So I think that we need to ask ourselves and really reflect on that. What's the hurry? Right? And to ask ourselves if it's justified or not.
Yeah. Being okay, talking about difficult topics, and also recognizing that if you don't get it right the first time, that doesn't mean you can't go back and
Right?
say, I thought about it.
Yep.
I'm not comfortable with the way I responded,
Yep.
and I'd like to take another crack at it.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay that it's not perfect. I think that's so, so important for us to keep telling ourselves that, right? And I often find that when people experience low level depression, it's always good to ask ourselves, where did this come from? Did I have a feeling of being heard, of being safe? Some of the work that I've done with people is just making them conscious that they've been in yellow all their lives, for instance, in the bell curve with polyvagal theory, and just recognize that maybe bringing themselves from yellow back to green, where they're grounded and such, is really, really important, but recognizing these cycles when they get trapped in the yellow, when yellow gets activated, or red in some worst instances, is really, really important.
Right. And there are lots of videos out there about how to center yourself, whether or ground yourself, whether that's putting both feet on the floor and breathing deeply
Yep,
or naming five things you see around you.
yep,
But that's another tool in your toolbox.
yeah, exactly. So also, I think when people are hyper conscious, just imagining, for instance, that you first of all recognizing that not everybody sees what you have inside, right? People are not seeing your inner state. What you present outwardly is one thing, but what you have and what you carry within yourself is not being observed. So imagining sometimes that you have a force field around you. I use active imagination with some of my more intuitive clients, especially, and when they're very visual, I use this, imagining some sort of force field around them just to protect them, to feel that they have that boundary that they can start to perceive, that they can start to build from. So that way they're not experiencing that same level of hyperconsciousness.
Hmm. It's an
Hmm.
interesting strategy.
Yeah. And maybe asking ourselves what was left unfinished in my family. And really, as you said earlier, going into therapy, right? Sometimes we might need to reparent ourselves in therapy and to give ourselves the parental experiences we never had before so that we can strengthen ourselves and build on a better self concept of who we are as a person. So, so, so important to do that, especially.
And a lot of healing can take place in a healthy relationship. So whether
Hmm.
that's a friendship or a partnership, um, you can change your attachment style through that means.
Hmm. It's very possible to do that. That over time there can be a sense of sustainment that can start to actually alter your character and who you are as a person, your personality to some degree, right? In terms of how you see life as, right? So that if that helps to change your character sufficiently that you can experience things differently, then all of a sudden that's when you can start to have a marked level of change for yourself. So when these changes start to arise within ourselves, it can give us a sense of confidence in being in touch with our healthy adult. So a lot of this can happen in therapy, and I think that's a really, really good way of going through that. So yeah. And Fern, we talked about the importance in not being perfect, and I think also, like you were saying, choosing the people that you speak with and such, people that can be safe. And I think that carrying safety within ourselves is good for us, and even having an object that exemplifies safety. I think that once we start to work with what is safety, how can I feel safe? How can I experience safety within myself? either literally around me and such, or symbolically with sometimes an object I can hold on to if I go into, say, public spaces or family spaces or somewhere where I feel I can get triggered. That's really, really important to look at that, right?
Yeah, the little rock in your pocket.
Yeah, exactly. Or a little figure or something that you like from maybe a movie or something,
Yeah.
whatever that is. So, Fern, we're actually approaching the end of our session. This has been a really great talk we've had, you and I, about how it is that we can feel within our bodies and such, and how it is that we can reestablish a positive relationship with ourselves despite the past experiences that have come to shape us through family or sibling estrangement and such. So I'm already feeling more relaxed just talking about this stuff with you. So,
I'm glad I could help.
right? So excellent. I'm so glad that this has been helpful for our viewers. I'm most certain of as well too. And let's talk about resources. Let's talk about what is coming up for you or what you'd like to show with regards to our viewers.
Well, I'm a big fan of writing, as you know, and I think anytime you can write down some of these feelings and experiences on the page and then argue with yourself on the page, you start to see the weakness in your beliefs. And so I created the Sibling Estrangement Journal, which actually is available, and it helps to understand your relationship with a difficult sibling and to move forward.
Yeah, this is so, so important. It's a great resource. I like it a lot too. And my number one resource at this time is for people that do want to explore some of these patterns they're going through. There is the rumination workshop, Getting Beyond Rumination, the tool for change. That's coming up actually at the beginning of May. So if people want to register for that, this can be a very important workshop for some people that do get stuck in how they feel and what they're experiencing in their bodies or their minds when it comes to their own particular experiences with sibling estrangement. So it really helps to foster getting unstuck from rumination. And it's a cutting edge tool that I've developed that it helps people to get beyond that point where a lot of us can re-experience things. So this is my number one resource. I do have the support group again every couple of weeks and so. So if people want to join me with that, they can simply reach out to me on Messenger or contact me at siblingestrangement.com. There's a contact me section. People can reach out. And as always, Fern, I really appreciate getting together with you to be able to do this. I think we've shed a lot of light today on this particular subject that needed to be talked about when it comes to the body and how that's experienced for us when it comes to sibling estrangement. So
Well, it's always great to be with you. Thank you.
thank you so much for being here, and we'll talk again very soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye bye.